topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
And welcome to Triversity Talk. I'm Wendy, your hostess with the mostest tonight, and I am broadcasting from New York City, and it is cold here. It's icy, and they're lighting the Christmas tree in Rockefeller Center, and I'd much rather be with you here streaming than be in Rockefeller Center right now because it is just freezing. So I hope everybody had a really wonderful Thanksgiving. If you heard about it, Triversity Center, located in Milford, Pennsylvania. We are having a holiday party on December 22nd. You can find our page on Facebook. And if you are in the tri-state area, that's upstate New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania, we're having a big holiday party and no cover, no nothing. It's our gift to you. So please come. That's December 22nd. And that will be held at Camp Reimagine, which is in Huguenot, New York, which is right next to Port Jervis. So you can actually Google it and get more information. But I hope to see some of my listeners' faces there. You'll come up to me and you'll say, "Hey, Wendy," because we've got some great raffle prizes, which I am not going to disclose, but you'd be very excited to see what we've got inside. So my guest tonight came to me from my amazing friend, Jed Ryan, who has been on the show. He met my guest at an event and he said, "You've got to have this guy on your show." And when I heard about what he did, I'm like, yes. Our guest tonight is a costume curator, display artist, set designer, a fashion historian, and a non-binary multi-hyphenate artist. I hope I got that all out in one word correctly. You know what? He really does it all. And this is what really turned me on. He has such a background in queer doll history, and especially queer Barbie. That was like, could the timing be any better on queer Barbie with the Barbie movie coming out? So we've got a lot to talk about tonight. And in his own words, the one hat he'll never take off is being fabulous. Welcome, Frank New.
Hello.
Well, hello and welcome to our world. It's so nice to have you here tonight, Frank.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here, Wendy. Thank you.
Well, Jed Ryan had met you, and I was completely intrigued by anyone that does queer doll history. I run into people that do everything. I know people say to me, "Wendy, you seem to know people that do everything and you know more people than anyone." And with all of that, you popped into my life. I love that you have an academic background in that. And then very intrigued by queer Barbie. Interestingly enough, because we talked a little before the show, you started learning about that like 5 years ago. The Barbie movie wasn't even out then.
Exactly. So I always like to say, because it has popped up where someone, has said, has this interest, come, because of the movie.
Right.
And I always just like to correct and say, no, my passion for Barbie came quite some time ago. I mean, even as a kid, is really kind of when my passion with sort of dolls began. That, unfortunately, due to toxic masculine sort of ideals, I had to kind of tuck that away. And it wasn't until an adult where I revisited collecting dolls and becoming a doll collector, and then diving into academia with my research and my master's studies.
What was it about? So this is interesting, because Barbie was not. I couldn't deal with Barbie when
Mhm.
Barbie was popular, and my friends were okay. I couldn't deal with Barbie. I got Skipper, and I got another doll that looked like Barbie but wasn't. So what was it? Barbie was too much for me. You
Mm.
know what I'm saying? What was it about Barbie that wasn't too much for you?
Well, I feel like for me, like especially as a kid, it was just the land of creativity where you could just sort of create and style sort of
Yeah.
this world and get lost into, sort of that imagination, which is what I feel I was drawn to. And when I've talked to sort of other queer people who are into collecting dolls and things like that, sort of have a similar message. Because I know for me, like, it was a great way to escape and, a healthy way to escape. And
It's a healthy way, right? And knowing what you do now, right? I was linking that with the fact that, you do display, right? You do
yes,
costume design and all of that. Barbie as a kid could really fulfill all of that for you. That
yes,
you didn't have like a Barbie dream house, did you? That was my thing.
I did not. So I played with Barbie in secret
You
at a
did.
friend's house down the street, because I was never allowed
Oh,
to have one for myself. So that sort of play was kept between myself and my friend, and and that was something that we did. She definitely had the Barbie dream house, which was cool, and yeah, and that was a safe place, where I could play and like there was no judgment.
well, and you're very lucky that you were as a kid to have a friend like that, because that's first of all a very supportive friend, and second of all, anything that was being stifled for you, you could just enjoy yourself when you were there. And I have to tell you, so I'm not an interior designer. I'm a frustrated interior designer, and every place I've ever lived, I mean, I used to put contact paper on the walls growing up, Frank, because I couldn't hang wallpaper, but I still right, because I was a kid, right? And Barbie's dream house for me was just everything because as you remember, if you play with your friend, you had the furniture and you could and then you could make someone like you bedspreads and little pillows and just like fake fur carpeting and all of that.
Totally.
Yeah, and so, you probably honed, like, your skills for what you do in your real life now by Barbie.
Absolutely. That was definitely, I feel, a piece of it. I've always had sort of a creative interest in things as a kid. And, it was in undergrad when I sort of discovered my passion for visual merchandising and just window display and things of that. Actually, I take that back. It was my last job in New Orleans before I moved away. I worked in a coffee shop, and the coffee shop was the busiest coffee shop in in the city. Like that location, particular location, had the highest volume. So no one, the store manager really didn't care too much about the pastry case and how it looked. And then I came along and I sort of had a knack for styling and sort of getting the pastry case looking impeccable no matter how busy we were. And so it was me who, for the first time, the store was able to actually get like a flying or sort of pass the merchandising test with flying colors, if you will, because of me. And it was sort of that where someone said to me, have I ever considered doing display and visual merchandising? And it was
Wow.
really from there and then into undergrad where I sort of dipped my toes further, if you will. And went to undergrad in Chicago. So I worked on like um, thrift shop windows and things of that, anything to sort of get experience and things of that.
But
I
when you were in Chicago, you were like finally able to fly free,
Yes.
and yeah, and the best version of you could come out, which speaks volumes. To be
Yeah.
able to get your feet wet in all those areas when you're at that age had to be like a first time for you. And it started with the. I love that it started with a display case in the coffee shop.
Yeah, arranging pastry cases, and by college I went to school in the Merchandise Mart in Chicago, and there was a Jamba Juice in the Merchandise Mart, and one day I worked up the courage to approach the store manager because they had a display case that clearly hadn't been changed in months, and it had like spider webs and things of that. And I worked up the courage to ask her if she would be open to me doing the window display. And there really wasn't a budget for it, but she would give me smoothies in exchange for
Oh, how
doing the
cool!
window. So, as a college student who had no money, having smoothies was great.
Oh, I think that's a great deal, right? And again, you were starting to get experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, kind of how I started in display. And then I went on to work for Nordstrom for about 7 years. I worked at Bloomingdale's as well. I've worked at Saks. I helped open the Brookfield store several years
Downtown.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So these are, so now we've gone from a display case in a coffee shop to
mhm.
Jamba Juice, and now we're at Bergdorf's. This is like
Yes.
a really big leap. How did you initially make that happen? You had to have a portfolio, I'm thinking, right? Or you interned, or
Of course. So, I mean, really, my display roots really began at Nordstrom.
okay,
I had a person there, Larry Van Neville, who worked in display for many, many years, very old school sort of display, if you will. And, a lot of what I learned really came from that individual and that team. And that was in Old Orchard Mall, which is in Skokie, Illinois, so in the
wow,
suburbs of Chicago. And it was there where I really learned a lot. And then from there, um, really got the experience. And then I worked at Bloomingdale's thereafter, Nordstrom, and then from Bloomingdale's I went to, and I freelanced as well, like in the beginning when I first moved to New York. So prior to New York, I worked at Nordstrom and then worked in Bloomingdale's, and I freelanced in the beginning because in New York, as I'm sure you know, that you can have experience, but if you don't have New York experience,
oh, you know what? Let's call
there's
that out. I mean, come on. Like,
it's a
the
big
window
difference,
that you did in Skokie, wherever, can't
Yes.
match the window, and it's so crazy. And yes, you're 100% right. You're
Yeah.
they look down, they look down on you, and yeah, I
Yeah.
know about the whole world of freelance because I've been doing it my entire life.
Yeah. And you know what I mean? That's the thing, in New York, because no one does business anywhere like New York does. Like you have to be able to move at New York speed,
Right.
because sometimes you're installing something and you've got less than an hour to do it. So, the speed at which one works in New York is
It's
wild.
insane. I'm also thinking, Frank, all the stores you're naming, those it's super corporate.
Yes.
Um, I've
Yeah.
worked so I do fit modeling. People, you know what that is. I'm
Yeah.
gonna assume I'm like a size 8 and I have to give feedback to designers. But those are all big brands I've worked with. And whenever those stores were coming in to whatever company, everybody was like this. It's very, very judgmental and rigid. And I'm imagining you, this amazing creative soul, trying to satisfy them because there's usually a bunch of them and they all have different opinions.
Yes. There's usually a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So yeah, so it I so eventually I worked for Neiman Marcus in White Plains, and then I went to Saks and Saks downtown and helped open that store. And it was that experience for me that was sort of the breaking point where I said I've had enough of sort of this life and corporate, and really wanted to do my own thing. And it was that store that drove me to sort of like want to do that. And and the thing too that I always find, like, when you listen to your instincts, like, you're never led wrong.
True.
And that sort of last job, which was about 7 years ago now, I was preparing to give my 2 weeks notice, and the week prior to that, I was laid off as part of a big sort of layoff that was happening at the time, and given severance and all of that. And
So you
so,
had your startup money for your company. Look
yes,
at that work.
exactly. So yeah, the joke was on them,
Right.
because it was just a great sort of blessing in disguise. And and again, it's moments like that where you absolutely always follow your instincts, and
I
and
so
yeah,
totally agree with you, but sometimes, we all fall prey to the what if factor,
for
right? Getting
sure.
laid off from your job. How am I going to pay my bills or whatever? Sometimes I had a friend who used to say, well, one door closes, another one opens, but the door that opens the second time isn't as wide. I'm sorry, that's in the back of my head. And you know what, Frank? I try not to practice that, but I
Yeah,
do as an instinctive person. Also, I know I have a little bit of that, like cautious, like and I try not to listen. Because look at someone like you. Look at what you did, and you had your severance, you had your seed money to
yeah.
start up
And I
your
mean,
business.
that was on a Friday, and I started my first freelance gig that Tuesday, and I've never looked back.
That
So.
is really, really right, really incredible. So what made you so interested in history, queer fashion history? Let's call it that.
So in my undergrad, like, fashion history was definitely, I would say, probably my favorite sort of area, and then so that sort of has never left me. Like, I've always sort of enjoyed fashion history and, like, period pieces when it comes to movies and things like that, and
You
so I just kind of took that sort of passion, and when I started to research, which led me to the costume studies program at NYU, and which I completed back in 2021. And sort of my research around sort of queer doll history and queer Barbie began in that first semester, which really began as an abstract of a 2-page abstract, less than 2-page abstract, that eventually morphed into a 155-page thesis project.
Oh my God, that's a book.
Nearly there. Yes. Yep.
I
Uh,
did just that's a book. Well, no, I'm thinking once you put the photographs in it,
yes. Absolutely. Yes.
I'm an
Uh,
entrepreneur. Like I'm already ahead of you there. I think that's a great idea.
yeah. Yeah. I really wanted to sort of combine sort of my passions. Because when you're writing something that sort of massive, like, you want something that you're going to enjoy.
Right.
Spending the hours and time on writing this thing, and so for me it really and then I eventually realized how sort of niche it really is, and that the areas that I cover have sort of been touched on here and there, but have never really been combined sort of in the way that I present it. And
Well,
so,
I'm dying to have you share some of that with us because I know a lot of things about a lot of things, and I don't know anything about this, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners don't. Share some favorite tidbits with us.
sure. So I'll touch on sort of the areas that I covered in my
Yeah.
thesis, which, so the first chapter I focus on queer designers that have collaborated for Barbie. And so it's sort of, the way that I like to describe it is sort of telling the story behind the box. So you see the Barbie, you see the box, and you see the designer name, but that's really all you get.
Right.
So with my research, I go sort of past the Barbie box, if you will, and go into sort of the history of the designer. So I go in chronological order. So it's with Billy Boy, who designed 2 Barbie dolls for Mattel in the late 80s. And Billy Boy is an international sort of fashion icon, designer, designed jewelry as well, had sort of what was probably one of the biggest Barbie collections in the world at the time. He had over like 2,000 Barbies, and he was the first queer person to have their name on the box.
Oh, and that's first of all, the whole thing is amazing. And now I have questions about him. So did I guess Mattel approach him to design for Barbie?
More than likely, it was around the 45th anniversary of or 26th anniversary, sorry, 26th anniversary of Barbie,
Okay.
and so yeah, so more than likely, because Billy Boy was a very prominent sort of figure in fashion. He was one of Andy Warhol's muses, one of Andy Warhol's last pieces, Billy Boy portrait or a Barbie portrait of Billy Boy was one of the sort of last pieces that Andy Warhol completed before his death, and that was the sort of nod to Billy Boy, who refused basically to sit for his portrait, and so Warhol's response to that was creating sort of this Barbie portrait and calling it Portrait of Billy Boy.
This is amazing. Can I Google this later and see this portrait?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the there's two, and one of the portraits I believe still hangs in the Mattel headquarters, and the one that went to Billy Boy was sold at auction years ago.
Wow. He must have made a fortune being like the first queer designer for Barbie. I'm thinking like, you would know this. Do they pay residuals for designing those clothes?
That piece, I don't really know sort of the logistics of like contract
Yeah.
and how all of that works, and sort of that piece, whether if they get royalties or anything like that. That I'm not sure, but I would imagine, when you look at the amount of collaborations,
Oh my God. Yeah.
I mean, the exposure too. I mean, the exposure in doing something like that. As well is really great. So yeah, I mean, when you look at the amount of collaborations that have happened, it definitely has to be worth the while to sort of do that and have that. So yeah, so that's a little piece. Billy Boy was a very interesting person, and some years after sort of that collaboration was short-lived, and then I believe in the early 90s just kind of did away with sort of the Barbie collection and sold the artwork, and kind of moved away from that. And so yeah, so that sort of piece begins with Billy Boy, and then I go into Bob Mackie, which began designing Barbie dolls in the very early 90s.
And I knew about Bob Mackie, but
Yes,
Bob Mackie, like in that genre, is such a household name. Of course, you would know that Bob Mackie did that.
yes. So and Bob Mackie has gone on to be the longest collaborator with Mattel and Barbies in history.
I had no idea. When I hear Bob Mackie, I think of Cher.
Oh yes, yeah, and there's several Cher Bob Mackie dolls which are amazing.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And while we're having this conversation, how many dolls do you have in your personal collection?
Somewhere around 500 ish.
Gosh, Frank, where do you like? Do you have like a display case for them, or?
Well, I did, and so in June of this year, I gave up my apartment and I put everything into storage, and I became a nomad. So
Oh my God, you're a digital nomad. We're having this conversation while you're nomading.
yes, yes, I am currently apartment sitting on the Lower East Side.
Which is where I was this afternoon broadcasting my other show. Really funny. From
Yeah.
Pangea on 2nd Avenue between 11th and 12th. You see, we were,
Oh
probably
yeah,
a stone's throw from each other. So
yeah.
the dolls are now in storage.
They're in storage. They
I hear you
are.
screaming, Frank, let us out, let us out.
Yeah, but they're all inventoried and accounted for, and yeah, and I still continue to collect dolls. Even, as my friend Jack likes to say, "Oh, are you buying that for your storage unit?"
I love right, exactly. Well, I'm thinking you're going to be working on your PhD in New Zealand. So
Yes,
was
that's
that
coming up
the
next.
decision to take and put the dolls in storage and free up your life so you can be in New Zealand? Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. This last year, I celebrated 10 years of living in New York. And so I was really kind of, wanting some change. I didn't really know exactly what that was. And sort of things kind of started to sort of reveal themselves. And, one of that was the PhD. And I really need to be sort of flexible for that. And I really was starting to feel I wanted less and less constriction. I
Yes.
turned 40 this past July, so multiple, sort of big things happening this year, and so
That's so young, Frank. You have no idea.
uh,
That was your catalyst. My God, what should I say?
so yeah, so I just wanted less constriction, and so the timing of the lease ending,
Yeah.
confirming that I would be getting the opportunity to go back to school. So I said, you know what, we're going to take that and run with it. So yeah,
Yeah.
so that's kind of the main.
What made you decide on getting your PhD in New Zealand in this particular area?
Yeah, so my PhD will be in the line of fashion studies, and it was an opportunity. The director of the program reached out to me, and she is an incredible person in the field, and sort of in the lineage of sort of the people in this field. Like, she's within the first lineage of this, and so there's a need for more uh, individuals at this level of research. And so when she reached out about discussing sort of the idea, I would be crazy to sort of pass up that opportunity. And it just kind of unfolded from there. And yeah, so I'm kind of shifting away from sort of costume studies into fashion studies, and I will focus specifically on sort of the stigma around doll play within queer youth, particularly male identifying, and finding that many sort of relate to sort of the same notion that the only way that one could play with dolls was in secret. And I'm realizing that many sort of share that storyline, if not similar.
I've
And so
had
that's
many a person on this show. And first of all, I want to say thank you for pushing this envelope a little further because there's kids out there everywhere that are
yes,
playing with dolls in secret. And my wishful thinking is maybe from the research that you do and what happens next, and if you go on shows and talk about it, maybe those kids eventually won't have to play with dolls in secret. Maybe we will get rid of some of the what I call taboos, society gender taboos, that boys should do this and girls should do that.
exactly. And that's really what I sort of go in, and sort of the tagline, and like what I used for the Jersey City event with Jersey City Pride,
Yes,
is sort of the doll play made me gay, which is kind of my like tagline.
I think that's
Um,
great.
it makes for a catchy title, but it's also very much related back to the research, because that's through my readings, like that's a lot of what I've come across is there is this notion in some that playing with dolls will make you queer or gay. And so while it makes for a catchy title, it's actually like a real thing that in the sort of world of toxic masculine sort of ideals,
Right.
there
Or
are individuals
toxic
out there.
masculine expectations, right?
Yeah,
Or expectations of how male children should behave. or
Yes.
female
That is,
children even, because now we're getting into, the girl that identifies, always when tomboy is the word, right?
mhm,
Except it's much more than that. She completely identifies with a male gender and wants to dress that way. And
mhm.
we're moving into times where I can tell you, even with our organization, we talk a lot about transgender children, and there's lots of transgender children now. And your timing on this is really right, because those kids should just be allowed to play and express themselves any way any child can. There shouldn't be these lines of demarcation. Oh my God, Billy is playing with dolls and wanting to put on girls' clothes. Um,
Exactly. Exactly. Toys are toys, you
thank
know,
you.
and it really wasn't until sort of the last 10 to 15 years where here in the US where we started to see some sort of shift around that, and it really was Target was the first sort of big box retailer that did away with gendered toy aisles
Right.
and that sort of thing. And yeah, and so I that's really sort of what I focus on, and that sort of initial idea came from my master's thesis. Instead of doing a traditional conclusion, I did a coda where I interviewed another queer fashion doll collector to sort of
Ah,
add another perspective as like a way of I'm not the only one. Here's another sort of perspective, and that was sort of all that I had in my head. Was just a more clever way to sort of end that. And then after I did that interview, I walked away from that going, it felt like there was more there. There was something
yeah.
sort of there, and so when I was approached about for the PhD program, that's immediately where I went sort of back to that idea and seeing how I could sort of morph that into something bigger, because that sort of never left me. Sort of that feeling of like I feel like there's more here, and so now I get the opportunity to dive further, and it will be a research based thesis where I will be interviewing 15 to 20 queer fashion doll collectors and looking at sort of their story in youth and their experience with doll play as a child and sort of what that experience was and what that looked like, and then returning to dolls as adults and realizing that none of that really holds weight. If I want to play with dolls, I'll play with dolls, and
Right.
uh, and looking at their adult life as collectors and what that looks like, how they collect, and things of that.
I wonder how many kids out there whose parents are thinking, I hope maybe they're okay with it, but in their hearts, they're hoping the kid outgrows the doll play.
Oh,
But then
absolutely.
you become an adult and you love dolls as a kid and you love dolls as an adult. Now you have the money to collect as many dolls as you want.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's all the stuff that goes with them, the clothing and hairstyles, and it's a very creative niche. And there's not a lot of people that you hear in terms of queer doll collections, because it was done in secret as kids, and it was stifled.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And then, as an adult, you get to make different choices, and for the most part are likely not in that environment anymore where you can, sort of live the life that you want.
Exactly.
And yeah, it's like there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to play with dolls and collect dolls, and there's so many different ways to collect as well, from, there's people that enjoy sort of photographing and telling stories, through their doll collections, and there are those who strictly don't remove anything from the box, and
Well,
everything.
we've all been told that the dolls are, I was going through the Barbies that I had gotten as an adult, and I don't even know why, because honestly, I was not a big Barbie fan, but I've got like 10 of them that I kept in the box. And then I started going on eBay. My 10 aren't the valuable ones, but they're in
Mm,
the box, but they're not, because there's things that make them worth something if they're collectible. You would know what that is.
yeah, yeah. It depends on, um, you know, sort of a lot of times, especially with like the adult sort of collector, like with Bob Mackey's, and it varies. There are Bob Mackey Barbies that you can find in great condition on eBay for
Right.
about $100,
Yeah.
and then there are other ones, and I think a lot of that sort of shifts based on sort of the climate of the times. If Cher is like with especially with Cher and her recent Christmas album. So, Cher is very much at the top
She's
of.
lighting the tree at Rockefeller Center while we're talking, friends.
Exactly.
Cher is out there doing that.
Exactly.
And it's
Exactly.
better.
Exactly. So, it's times like that where, when you have a figure that's very much, at the topic of conversation, though the values of those dolls, are likely higher right now,
Right.
and, when it's a less share, when it's a more of a quiet time and not so much of a spotlight on share,
Right.
the prices will fluctuate.
But doesn't
And
it
it's
also have
with the
to do
movie.
with like limited editions too? It's like art or paintings
Yeah,
when there's,
absolutely.
yeah, if it's
Yeah,
a limited edition one.
exactly. And there's different levels of with Mattel. They do different sort of levels of sort of collector and things of that of collector status. And and I have some dolls that there's only like 5,000 or less in the world, and
Wow.
so those things, like the less there are of something, typically the value on that is going to be pretty
Right,
substantial.
because they're rarer. I want to go back in history with queer dolls with you. What
Yes.
how far back have you studied? Like what was the way people looked upon doll play? Let's go back. What's the furthest back you've gone? Like 1800, 1700?
Oh no. So when it comes to queer doll history, the first known queer doll dates back to 1978
Are you kidding?
with
Come on,
Gay Bob.
we know it's been going on. Look at okay, let's go back to the 1800s. There's a method to my madness why I brought this up. How people dressed back in those days, right?
Oh
Uh
yeah, I mean dandies and things
yeah,
of that for sure.
yeah, very stylized in all of that. So I really expected you to say, "Oh, there was definitely queer doll play back in those times," you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say exactly, but yeah, I imagine to some extent, for sure. But as far as queer dolls go, like the first known queer doll was Gay Bob in 1977, which was designed right here in New York City.
And what it was Gay Bob?
Gay Bob, yeah.
I
And there were 10,000 of Gay Bob made and anatomically correct as well. And it came in a yellow sort of colored box
Gay
with a
Bob,
closet
right.
and sort of the tagline like come out of the closet. And yeah,
Oh,
and
how clever.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, so it kind of, as far as queer doll history goes, kind of starts with Gay Bob back in '77, and there really wasn't another sort of queer doll until the '90s when we saw sort of so Billy Boy also developed his own doll line, which he launched sort of after Mattel in the early '90s, and then in 1993 we had Earring Magic Hen, which is sort of dubbed the accidental gay doll that Mattel released back in
Yeah, it would
1993.
have been accidental because yeah, that could not have been intentional. So that was in the early 90s.
Yes, yes. So this Ken doll, so essentially this Ken doll was in response to a survey that was sent out to young girls, and sort of questioning whether or not like Ken was relevant to sort of keep around. And the sort of consensus on that was young girls wanted Ken around, but he needed to be cooler. And so this was sort of Mattel's response to making Ken cool. And so with this doll, we saw he had like molded blonde hair, the first Ken doll with an earring sort of piercing, but was wearing a lilac pleather vest
Oh my
and
God.
a lilac cropped mesh top and a necklace that was silver metallic thread and a hoop, which very much looked like a certain sort of sex object, if you will.
Oh yeah.
And, and there was a great article in the Chicago Reader that came out that year, identifying that, for exactly what it was, because in my research, I go into sort of looking at queer club trends of the early 90s. And, this particular object was one of the biggest sort of accessories amongst club kids. And it was worn everywhere but where it was intended to wear, including around the neck. It was worn on jackets and bracelets and things like that. And, and Mattel, it was a PR fiasco that Mattel completely denied, ever, they would never release, this sort of thing. And, and I mean, during this time, like,
Excuse
you
me,
didn't
they
see,
did.
yeah. And I mean, this was a time where, no one was doing pride collections, during this time. And, so it just was not, they were not willing to admit at all that this was their intention. And, and there's still a lot of mystery, around that, as for sure as like, the intentions of that, but it went on to be discontinued. It was pulled sort of from the shelves after a certain amount of weeks. And, from what I have read, it went on to be one of the biggest selling Ken dolls in the history of the brand, because every gay man in America,
right, and they pulled it.
Exactly. Every gay man in America went and bought this doll, because for the first time, a gay man was seeing a reflection of himself in a commercial setting.
Thank you very much, and acknowledged, and it's a crossover from doll play to but they pulled it.
Yes.
You know what we're doing? Because I never thought about this. It is amazing that we don't have dolls like that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it wasn't until the Barbie movie,
right,
where the Magic Earring Ken was acknowledged for the first time since that sort of debacle. And, which was great. And there's several other dolls in the movie that are referenced that, were essentially sort of erased from the archives and never mentioned again. And, and I think at this point in time, like, I feel from a historical standpoint, the movie was really great. I think it was good to see sort of these dolls come back to the surface and that, were sort of vanished, because at the end of the day, we all know these things exist. So why pretend, and at this day and age, like, who's it going to hurt?
Well, and it was for many people a feel good. It was a feel good movie. It was pink and fun and hi Barbie, and everything about it made you feel good. I'm curious. Of course, you remember G.I. Joe.
Yep.
What was the impact of the G.I. Joe doll on the market from your knowledge? I just remember G.I. Joe, he's a man from head to toe. Do you remember? God, I don't remember that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a whole nother interesting sort of piece. And I have a good friend, Zara, who has written a lot and has done a lot of research more on like Superman and in the body, and which very much relates to G.I. Joe as well. And and this whole notion, and I go into this as well when I go into doll play and child or and toy play in general with my in my thesis, that it's sort of called, like, you call it an action figure.
Right. It's not a doll; it's an action figure. That makes it okay. Right.
Exactly. And that is made up U.S. bullcrap. That because at the end of the day, it's still a doll, but but you call it an action figure, and then it's okay for a boy to play with G.I. Joe. But when you think of that, so it's like, let's give this kid the G.I. Joe or the action figure to play with and get him away from dolls. And then, so, if you're questioning your sexuality at this point and you're being forced, this other doll which, it's a whole nother can of worms because, when you look at the body of these figures, you look, the fetishization of like the uniform and things of that, like you just made this child's day who, is, this little queer kid, you're like, oh, you'd rather me play with a doll that's, chiseled and, in uniform and all this, so it's a very interesting, perspective, which I hope to sort of dissect further in my
That is,
research.
you know what? I
Visual
definitely
culture.
want you to dissect that because, I'm thinking they're worried about the kid playing with like a Barbie.
Yes.
Feed him the whole 9 yards. Here you go. You can find this guy at a gay bar.
Yep. Exactly.
It's old,
Exactly. Exactly.
gorgeous, having a
Yep.
cocktail.
Yep. Yeah.
But don't play with
That's
Barbie.
what's,
My
yes.
God.
Yes. Like that is what is just, the humor in it all. In this made up toxic culture of, slap action figure on it and then it's perfectly fine.
Right.
It's like toys are toys. And that's, at the end of the
Yeah.
day, like that's, yeah. And for me, like, and I know in many others, like it has taken years to sort of unravel and, move away from these ideals that were instilled in me as a kid that, I realize as an adult, and especially as I get older, where it's, I have less and less sort of qualms about anything. And my filter has gone out the window a long time ago. And,
Yeah, I got that.
yeah, so it's, I'm just all, it's just about being yourself. And,
What made it okay for you finally to be okay, queer, dolls? What made it okay? Was it a process or was it an epiphany?
It's definitely been a process. I have gone through, a lot of things in sort of my adulthood. I can say that I probably barely made it out of my 20s alive, and I did a lot of things to sort of regroup and reshape.
Good for you.
When it comes to addiction and things of that, and I've done a lot of work around that, and really just getting into sort of the shell and life that I was really meant to live, and that's really been sort of the trajectory of the last sort of 15 years, and
A long
doing a
time.
lot of work on myself, and getting to this place, has surely not been easy, but ultimately I realize, and especially this past year, I began identifying as non-binary in the beginning of the year, because I really realized that for me, and again going back to constriction, like I wanted less and less labels, less about labels, less constriction, and just the freedom to be myself in whatever it is that I'm feeling in the moment. So it's been a journey and a process. I went through a divorce a few years ago, which helped me sort of get to this other side, figuring out who I am and things of that, and yeah, and it's a continuous journey.
But it is a
continues to
continuous
evolve.
journey. But as you go along this path, and you're willing to peel your layers off, right? I call it layers, like an onion. Look what's happening.
Exactly.
You're going to go to New Zealand. You're going to do this research. You're going to come out on the other side being able to communicate this to other people. And that's how differences are made in the world, right? For every little
Absolutely.
kid that's playing with a doll in secret, they're going to be able to turn around and have somebody like you who's going to make it okay for them. They'll have someone
Exactly.
to identify with.
Exactly. And it's just important for these stories to be told more than ever
Thank
now,
Thank
so,
you. Yeah, actually now more than ever with our whole political environment
yep.
and the things that we read every day. Well, we are down to the wire here.
Yeah.
So I want to hear your parting words and anything that you want to tell us in your magical moments.
Sure. It has been great. Thank you so much for having me. And having these having platform like this to share and talk about sort of where I'm going next, is great. And, find me on social media, Man Your Style on Instagram, Fashion Queer
Man Your Style
Historian.
on Instagram. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can find me on TikTok at Fashion Queer Historian for all the updates and, what's coming next. So thank you so much for, this opportunity.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you on. As a guest, you have to keep in touch and let me know what your next is when you get your PhD. And who knows, maybe you'll end up making New Zealand your home. It's a fabulous place.
Who knows? I have living the nomadic life. I have the freedom to move about. So who knows what will unfold in the next 4 years.
It's so funny. I call this segment Frank Knew, a passion for fashion. And it really has turned out that way. And you are starting new, your
Yes.
whole trajectory in front of you. I always take a parting picture before we go to say cheese. Great. One more. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I wish you the absolute best.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll chat soon.
Who tuned in tonight. Take care and have a good rest of week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.